There's a saying in pipeline work, the map is never the territory. Every inspector learns that in their first year, blueprints get filed wrong. Extensions get built without permits. Some farmer in 1974 ran a private irrigation line off a municipal main, and nobody caught it for 30 years. You find ghost lines, orphan valves, junctions that don't match any drawing ever committed to paper. It's normal. It's the job. What I found under Hargrove wasn't normal. My name is Marcus Voss. I've been a pipeline integrity inspector for the Tri-County Water Authority for 11 years. The work is exactly as unglamorous as it sounds. I drive to sites. I check corrosion levels. I ultrasound pipe walls. I write reports that nobody reads until something breaks. It's solitary work, mostly long drives through parts of the state that don't show up on tourism brochures. Pump stations in the middle of soybean fields. Valve chambers you have to wade through ankle-deep groundwater to reach. I've always liked it. There's a simplicity to pipes. Water goes in one end, comes out the other. Physics doesn't lie. Metal doesn't have opinions. I got the Hargrove assignment in October. The town had been filing water quality complaints for about 6 weeks. Residents reporting a metallic taste, slight discoloration, and an unusual warmth to the tap water. None of that is rare on its own. Old galvanized lines leach zinc. Seasonal temperature changes affect shallow mains, but the combination, plus the duration, flagged it for a field inspection. My supervisor, a man named Dale Prater, handed me the work order on a Tuesday and told me to take Delia Chen along because the pipeline network out there was extensive and he wanted it done before the ground froze. Delia had been with the authority for 3 years. She was sharp, meticulous, and had a better eye for corrosion mapping than anyone else on the team. We'd worked together a handful of times before, and I trusted her judgment. She drove her own truck out, and we met at the Hargrove Municipal Building on a Thursday morning that was cold enough to make your fillings ache. Hargrove is the kind of town that exists because it always has population around 2001. Traffic light, a grain elevator that dominates the skyline like a cathedral. The municipal water system serves the town proper, and about 40 rural connections along 2 trunk mains that run north and east from a treatment plant on the edge of town. Standard small town setup, nothing exotic, nothing that should have caused the kind of complaints that had been coming in. We started at the treatment plant. The operator, a heavy-set man named Lyle, walked us through the facility and everything checked out. Chlorine levels were right. Turbidity was within spec. The source well was clean. If the contamination was real, it wasn't originating at the plant. So we went to the pipes. The first 2 days were routine. We ran the trunk mains with electromagnetic sensors, checked valve conditions, pulled samples from hydrant taps at quarter-mile intervals. Delia handled the eastern trunk while I took the northern one. My line ran about 4 miles out of town along a county road, serving maybe 15 rural connections before dead-ending at an old farmstead. The pipe was 40 years old, ductile iron in decent shape for its age. I found some tuberculation, rust nodules building up inside the pipe. That could explain the taste complaints. I marked it for cleaning and kept moving. It was on the 3rd day that I found the other pipe. I was working a section about 2 miles north of town where the trunk main crosses under a creek. The creek crossing is a common failure point. Seasonal flooding scours the soil and exposes the pipe, or shifts it, or cracks the joints. I'd brought the ground-penetrating radar unit to map the pipe's position and depth before I dug down to inspect the crossing visually. The GPR screen showed the trunk main exactly where it should be, 4 feet down, running north-south, clean signal. But it also showed something else. A second pipe running parallel to the main, about 8 feet to the east and slightly deeper. Same diameter, looked like a 24-inch line on the radar return. I checked the blueprints. There was nothing there. No parallel main, and no abandoned line, and no storm sewer, and no gas pipe. According to every drawing I had, the only thing 8 feet east of the trunk main was dirt and clay, and whatever else had been sitting there since the last glacier retreated. I called Delia on the radio. "I've got a ghost line on GPR," I said. 24-inch, running parallel to the main about 8 feet east. "You have anything like that on your drawings?" "Nothing," she said. "You sure it's not a utility, gas, or telecom? At 24 inches? No, that's a water pipe or a sewer. Old abandoned line, maybe? Pre-municipal? Maybe. I'm going to dig down and take a look. I brought the mini excavator off the trailer and started digging. It took about an hour to get down to depth. The soil was dense clay, gray-brown, and it came up in heavy chunks that stuck to the bucket. When I hit the pipe, I knew immediately that it wasn't standard. The metal was wrong. Not ductile iron, not PVC, not steel. Or rather, it looked like steel, but with a faint gray-green patina that I'd never seen on any alloy I could name. It was smooth, almost polished, with no visible joints or weld seams. I climbed down into the trench and put my hand on it. It was warm. Not residual heat from the sun warm. The pipe was 6 feet underground. Nothing down there should have been warm, but the metal had a steady, gentle heat to it, like a living body, and when I held still, I could feel it vibrating. Not a mechanical hum. Not the chatter of flowing water under pressure. It was rhythmic, slow, almost biological. I pulled my hand back and stood there looking at it for a long time. Delia arrived about 40 minutes later. She climbed into the trench, put her own hands on the pipe, and I watched her face go through the same sequence mine had. Confusion, disbelief, then something closer to unease. "That's not water flow," she said quietly. "No. What is it? I have no idea." We traced the pipe in both directions using GPR. It ran parallel to the trunk main for the entire length we could scan, at least a mile in each direction, probably more. It maintained a constant depth and constant distance from the municipal line. It was precise in a way that suggested engineering, not accident. Someone had put this here on purpose, but there was no record of it, no connection to the water system at any point we could find, and no indication of what it was for. I called Prater. He told me to note it in my report and move on. Something in his voice was off, not surprised enough, if that makes sense. When someone tells you they found an uncharted 24-inch pipeline underground, you should have questions. He didn't ask a single one. I should have listened to him. I want to be clear about that. What happened next was my decision. Delia argued against it at first, and I overrode her, and I have to live with that. I decided to cut into the pipe. I had the tools, a portable band saw, cutting torch. The whole kit pipeline inspection sometimes requires physical access. You cut a coupon, test the wall thickness, check for internal corrosion, and weld a patch. It's standard procedure. What wasn't standard was doing it on a pipe that didn't exist in any blueprint. But I told myself I had a professional obligation to identify potential contamination sources. The town's water was bad. This pipe was right next to the water main. If something was leaching from it into the municipal supply, I needed to know what was inside. Delia stood back while I set up the bandsaw. The cut should have been routine. Even hardened steel gives way to a carbide blade in a few minutes. But the metal resisted, not in the way hard material resists. It didn't dull the blade or throw sparks the way high carbon steel does. It just seemed to close behind the cut. I'd push through a 1/4 inch and the curve would narrow, as if the metal was slowly flowing back together. It took me almost an hour to cut a 6-inch square coupon out of the pipe wall, working fast enough that the material couldn't heal behind my blade. When the coupon finally fell away, the fluid hit me in the chest. It wasn't water. It was warm, body temperature, maybe slightly above, and had a viscosity somewhere between water and light oil, clear with a faint amber tint. It smelled like minerals and something else, something organic that I couldn't identify, like the air inside a greenhouse mixed with clean sweat. It soaked through my coveralls and onto my skin, and where it touched, my skin tingled, not painfully, but the way your hands tingle when you've been sitting on them and the blood starts returning. The flow was steady, pressurized. Whatever was pumping this fluid was pushing it with real force. I moved back and watched it pool in the bottom of the trench. Delia took a sample in a glass jar and held it up to the light. "It's not water," she said. "I know. Marcus, what the hell is this?" "I don't know, but it's flowing. Something is pumping this through a pipe that isn't connected to anything." We watched the open hole in the pipe for about 20 minutes. I wish I hadn't, but I did. Slowly, And I mean slowly. Over the course of those 20 minutes, the edges of the cut began to move. The metal at the lip of the hole thickened, reached inward, and began to close. Not like anything mechanical, like a wound healing, like skin growing over a scab. By the time we left the trench that evening, the hole was half the size it had been when I cut it. We drove back to Hargrove in separate trucks. I didn't say much, and neither did Delia. I went to the one diner in town because I hadn't eaten since 6 in the morning, and I needed to sit somewhere warm and lit, where I could think about what I'd seen without the darkness of a trench around me. The diner was mostly empty. A few older men at the counter, a woman with a toddler in a booth by the window, a teenage waitress who brought me coffee without asking. I ordered a plate of eggs and sat there staring at the laminate tabletop, trying to make what I'd seen fit inside any framework I knew. I was halfway through eating when a man slid into the booth across from me. He was maybe 60, with a weathered face and hands that said he'd worked outside his entire life. He didn't introduce himself. He just sat down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not hostile, but not friendly. Evaluating. "You're the pipe man," he said, "Inspector?" "Yeah." "You've been digging out on the North Road." "That's right." He leaned forward slightly. "Stop." I set my fork down. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Stop digging, stop cutting, stop looking for what's wrong with the water. Nothing's wrong with the water. People have been calling in complaints for 6 weeks. New people. People who moved here from the city. Don't know what good water tastes like." His voice was flat, certain. "The water here is fine, better than fine. People in this town don't get sick. You ever notice that? Check the records, check how old the folks at the counter are, and how many pills they take. The water here is good. Sir, I've got a job to do. Your job is going to get somebody hurt." He stood up, and for just a second I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, fear, real deep fear. Leave the pipes alone. Both of them. He left. The waitress watched him go with no expression on her face. Nobody else in the diner reacted as if anything unusual had happened. Both of them, he'd said. He knew about the second pipe. I went back to my motel room and called Prater again. I told him about the fluid, the self-healing metal, the warning from the resident. I told him I wanted to bring in a lab team and possibly the state environmental agency. There was a long pause on the line. "Marcus," he said carefully, "I'm going to be straight with you. There are pipes in the ground out there that predate the municipal system. They predate the town. We know about them. They're not on the blueprints because they're not ours. They're not anyone's. They were there when the first wells were drilled in the 1890s, and they'll be there after the town is gone. Leave them alone. What's flowing through them? I don't know. Nobody knows. And the people who tried hardest to find out didn't come back better for it. Dale, there's contamination in the water supply. If that pipe is leaching into the municipal main, it's been leaching into the water for over 100 years, and the people in that town live longer and healthier than any population center in the Tri-County area. Check the data if you don't believe me. Hargrove hasn't had a cancer death in 17 years. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the motel bed with my laptop and pulled county health records. Prater was right. Hargrove's mortality statistics were impossible. Average lifespan was almost 92 years. Cancer rate was effectively 0. Heart disease was a quarter of the county average. The town was by every measurable standard one of the healthiest communities in the state. And nobody had ever flagged it because nobody had ever looked. It was just a small town with old people who didn't die. The water. The next morning, I met Delia at the diner for breakfast and told her everything. Prater's call, the health data, the warning from the old man. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I liked about her. When I finished, she stirred her coffee slowly and said, "So you want to stop? I want to understand what we're dealing with before we do anything else. That's not stopping, that's escalating. The pipe is infiltrating the municipal system. Whatever that fluid is, it's in the drinking water. People have a right to know." Delia looked at me. "The people here already know, Marcus. That old man knew. Prater knows. The only people who don't know are the new residents calling in complaints because their water tastes funny. So we just, walk away, file a clean report? I didn't say that. I said we should understand who we're protecting and from what before we start ripping pipes out of the ground. She was right, I know that now. But I had 11 years of professional instinct telling me that an unidentified contaminant in a public water supply was an emergency, and that every day I didn't act was a day I was failing at my job. So I made the decision that I'll spend the rest of my life regretting. I told Delia we were going to trace the pipe to its source. We spent the rest of that day mapping the anomalous pipe with GPR and electromagnetic locators. It ran the full length of the northern trunk main, 4 miles, and then kept going past the dead end of the municipal system, north into farmland, and then into a stretch of state forest. On the other end, it ran south through town, under the main street, and then turned east, loosely following the path of Delia's trunk main before diverging into the woods on the eastern edge of the county. But the truly disturbing discovery came when we re-examined the junction points where the anomalous pipe ran closest to the municipal main at 3 separate locations. We found that the 2 pipes were no longer separate. Thin tendrils of the gray-green metal had grown out of the anomalous pipe, through the soil and into the wall of the municipal main. They'd penetrated the ductile iron-like roots growing through concrete, slowly over years or decades, finding microfractures and corrosion pits and threading through them until they broke into the water column inside. The tendrils were hollow. The fluid was flowing through them, directly into the town's drinking water. This wasn't contamination, this was injection, deliberate biological injection. I decided to follow the pipe north into the state forest to find where it originated. Delia argued that we should go together, but the pipe diverged in 2 directions, and I didn't want to spend another week out here. She would take the eastern branch, I would take the northern one. We'd stay on radios, we'd check in every 30 minutes. We'd be careful. I can still hear her saying, "Be careful," as she climbed into her truck, the way she said it. Not casual, not rote, but deliberate, like she was placing the words in front of me as a barrier. I should have listened harder. The northern branch of the pipe ran into the forest and then underground, following the slope of a low ridge down toward a creek valley. The terrain got rough, no roads, thick undergrowth, the kind of landscape that doesn't want you there. I followed the GPR signal on foot, marking the pipe's path with flags. It was descending. Whatever this pipe connected to, it was deep. About 2 miles into the forest, I found the access point. It was a concrete slab, maybe 10 feet square, set into the hillside, and covered with decades of leaf litter and moss. It looked old. The concrete was cracked and stained with mineral deposits, and the surface had that rounded, weather-beaten quality that takes a long time to develop. There was a steel hatch in the center, heavily corroded but functional. The pipe's GPR signal went straight under the slab and then down, steeply, deeper than my equipment could track. I opened the hatch. The metal screamed as the rusted hinges broke free. Below, it was a vertical shaft, concrete-lined, about 6 feet in diameter, with a steel ladder bolted to one wall. The air coming up from below was warm and humid and carried that same greenhouse and mineral smell I'd noticed from the fluid. The pipe ran along the wall of the shaft, bolted in place with brackets that had the same gray-green color as the pipe itself. I keyed my radio. "Delia, I found an access shaft. Concrete looks old, the pipe goes down. How deep? Can't tell. My GPR bottoms out. Could be 50 feet, could be more. Marcus, don't go down there alone. I'm just going to look. That's what you said about cutting the pipe." She was right again, but I went down anyway. The shaft descended about 80 feet. The ladder was solid despite the corrosion, and the walls were dry for the first 40 feet before they started weeping. Not with groundwater, but with the fluid. It seeped through the concrete in thin films, running down the walls in slow rivulets, warm against my hands when I gripped the ladder rungs. By the time I reached the bottom, my gloves were soaked with it. The shaft opened into a tunnel, not a pipe, a tunnel. Wide enough to walk through upright, lined with the same concrete but older somehow, more degraded. The anomalous pipe ran along the ceiling, and here, deeper underground, I could see what I hadn't been able to see on the surface. The pipe wasn't just pipe anymore. The metal transitioned, gradually, over the course of maybe 50 feet into something else. The rigid gray-green steel softened, thickened, became slightly translucent. I could see the fluid moving inside it, not flowing steadily like water through plumbing, but pulsing, contracting, and expanding in slow, rhythmic waves. The pipe had become a vessel, a vein. I followed the tunnel. It curved gently, descending further, and as I walked, the walls changed too. The concrete gave way to exposed rock, limestone from the look of it, and the rock was covered with something. A thin layer of tissue, pale and faintly luminous, stretched across the stone like a membrane. It was alive. I could see it move when I breathed on it, contracting slightly, the way a sea anemone pulls inward when touched. Thread-like structures ran through it, dark against the pale background, branching and converging in patterns that looked vascular. The tunnel widened into a chamber, and in the chamber I found it. I don't have the right words for what I saw, and I've had months to search for them. The closest I can come is this. Imagine a heart. Not a human heart, something far larger and far older, a mass of pale, translucent tissue the size of a delivery truck, embedded in the limestone, filling the chamber from floor to ceiling. Veins, the pipes, ran into it from multiple directions, some still metallic, some fully organic, all pulsing with the same slow rhythm. The whole mass contracted and expanded like breathing. It was warm. The air in the chamber was body temperature, humid, and saturated with that mineral organic smell amplified to the point where I could taste it on the back of my tongue. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't infrastructure. It was an organism. Something alive, something vast, something that had threaded itself through miles of underground pipe or grown the pipes from itself. I couldn't tell which, and used them to circulate its fluid through the earth beneath Hargrove and through the town's water supply. Into the taps, into the people. I stood there for too long. I know that because my radio had been hissing with static since I entered the tunnel. And when it finally cleared, Delia's voice came through mid-sentence high and tight with something I'd never heard from her before. Can hear it moving? Marcus, it's in the walls. The whole tunnel is. Marcus, are you there? Are you receiving? Delia, I'm here. Where are you? I followed the eastern branch. There's a shaft like yours. I went down, Marcus. It's a burst of static. The same thing. It's everywhere down here. And something is. Delia, get out. Go back up the shaft. I can't. Something happened. Part of the tunnel collapsed behind me. Or closed. It's not collapse. The walls grew together. The tissue on the walls. Her voice broke for a second. She steadied it by force. I'm not hurt, but I can't go back the way I came. The tunnel continues forward. I think it connects to where you are. Stay where you are. I'm coming to you. Marcus. A pause. You need to bring the charges. The charges? I had a case of small-shaped charges in my truck. Standard equipment for pipeline demolition work. When a section of pipe needs to be removed quickly. I'd brought them out of habit. The way I always did. Delia knew I had them. She was thinking faster than I was. You want to blow the junctions, I said. If we sever the connections to the water main, we cut it off from the town. Whatever it's putting into the water stops. Delia, the people here have been drinking this for over 100 years. Their health data, I know. I saw the data too, but Marcus, this thing is growing. The tendrils at the junction points. They weren't there 10 years ago. I checked the maintenance records from the last inspection. Clear pipe walls, no penetration. Whatever this is, it's expanding, it's pushing more of its fluid into the supply. The complaints from the new residents aren't about taste. Their bodies aren't adapted. If this keeps accelerating, what happens when the concentration gets high enough to affect even the long-term residents? I didn't have an answer. She was right that it was growing. She was right that we didn't know the trajectory, and she was trapped underground with this thing. And every minute I spent debating was a minute I wasn't moving toward her. I climbed the shaft, sprinted to my truck, grabbed the case of charges and detonators, and went back down. The organism, the thing in the chamber, had changed while I was gone. The tendrils on the walls had thickened, the pulsing was faster. Whether it could sense what we were planning or was simply responding to the disturbance of my presence, I couldn't tell. But it was reacting. I moved through the chamber quickly, keeping to the edges, trying not to touch the tissue on the walls. It was hard. The stuff had spread, covering more of the rock surface, and in places it hung from the ceiling in translucent sheets. I pushed through it. Where it touched my skin, it was warm and slightly adhesive, and it left a residue that tingled the same way the fluid had. Past the chamber, the tunnel continued, curving east. I followed it for what felt like half a mile, but was probably less. The pipe, the vein, ran along the ceiling, still pulsing. At intervals, smaller branches split off from it, burrowing into the rock, heading in directions I couldn't follow. The network was vast. This wasn't one pipe. It was a circulatory system, extending who knows how far beneath the ground. I found Delia in a narrower section of tunnel, about a quarter mile from the eastern shaft. She was standing in front of a wall of tissue that had sealed the passage behind her. It was thick, several inches, and it moved, slowly contracting and expanding. She'd tried cutting through it with her utility knife, and the cuts had healed almost immediately.
"You okay?"
I said, "I'm fine. It hasn't tried to hurt me. I think it's just containing me, redirecting me." She looked past me toward the tunnel I'd come from. "You came through the chamber." "Yeah." "The one with the central mass?" "Yeah." She closed her eyes briefly. "Okay, here's what I think we should do." Delia had mapped 3 junction points where the anomalous pipe's tendrils penetrated the municipal main. She'd marked them on her GPS before she went underground. If we placed charges at each junction point, not to destroy the organism, just to sever the connections, we could cut it off from the water supply. The organism would still be alive down here, still circulating its fluid through its own network, but it would no longer be injecting into the town's water. "What happens to the people?" I said. "I don't know. They've been drinking this for generations. If it's in their biology, if their bodies are dependent on it, I don't know, Marcus, but we know it's growing, we know it's accelerating, and we know we're the only people who are going to do anything about it, because Prater and everyone else who knows has decided to look the other way." She met my eyes, and I could see the same conflict in hers that I felt in my chest. "This is our job. We identify threats to the water supply, and we neutralize them. This might be what's keeping them alive, and it might be what's eventually going to replace them. We don't know. But we know what a contaminant in a public water supply means, and we know what our obligation is." She was asking me to choose, not between good and bad, between 2 kinds of harm. Sever the connection and potentially hurt people who depend on the fluid, or leave it intact and let an unknown organism continue to infiltrate a population that hasn't been given the choice to consent. Delia was already hurt. Her arm was bleeding where she'd scraped it on the rock, and the tissue on the walls was reaching toward the blood. Slowly, but reaching. This thing was responsive, adaptive, and it was growing. I made the choice. We went up. The organism led us. The tunnel stayed open, as if it hadn't decided we were a threat yet, or as if it couldn't react fast enough. We climbed the eastern shaft together, Delia moving carefully with her injured arm, and emerged into forest that was dark and cold and felt impossibly clean after the humid warmth below. It took us 4 hours to set the charges. We drove to each junction point I'd mapped, dug down to where the tendrils crossed between the pipes, and placed these shaped charges to cut the connections without rupturing the municipal main. It was precise work, the kind of work we were trained for. My hands were steady, Delia's were not. But she did it anyway, and she did it right. We wired the detonators to a single trigger. I held it. Delia stood next to me in the dark, on the shoulder of the county road 2 miles north of Hargrove, and neither of us said anything for a long time. "Once we do this, we can't undo it," I said. "I know. Those tendrils took decades to grow through. If we're wrong, then we're wrong, and we'll answer for it. But we're making a decision that's more than anyone else has done." I pressed the trigger. The ground shuddered. Not dramatically, 3 small contained detonations muffled by 6 feet of earth. If anyone in town felt them, they probably thought it was a truck hitting a pothole. But I felt something else. A vibration, deep and low, that rose up through the soles of my boots and into my bones. The organism reacting, not an earthquake, a spasm, like a body flinching from a wound. It lasted about 10 seconds, and then it stopped, and the night was quiet. We drove back to Hargrove and checked the water at the nearest hydrant tap. Clear, cold, no metallic taste, no warmth, just water. I ran the field test kit on it, clean, within spec, indistinguishable from any other treated municipal water supply in the state. We filed our reports the next morning. I wrote up the tuberculation in the northern trunk main as the probable cause of the taste complaints, recommended a cleaning schedule, and noted nothing else. Prater accepted the report without comment. He didn't ask about the anomalous pipe. He didn't ask about the charges. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't interpret and said, "You two should take some time off." Delia went home to her apartment in the city. I went home to mine. We didn't talk about it, not at first. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make it more real, more irrevocable. 3 weeks later, the first reports came out of Hargrove. An elderly woman was hospitalized with sudden onset organ failure. No prior history, no identifiable cause. Then a man in his 70s, same thing. Then 2 more, then 6. Over the next 3 months, Hargrove's impossible health statistics inverted. People who hadn't been sick a day in their lives were deteriorating rapidly. The town's one doctor was overwhelmed. The county sent support. The state health department opened an investigation. They found nothing. No pathogen, no toxin, no environmental factor. Just bodies that seemed to be shutting down for no reason, as if something that had been sustaining them had been suddenly removed. Because it had, 17 people died that winter. All long-term residents, all over 60. The youngest was 63 and had lived in Hargrove her entire life. The oldest was 98 and had been walking 3 miles a day until the week before she collapsed. The state health department classified it as a cluster event of unknown etiology and convened a task force that produced a 200-page report full of data and no conclusions. I read every page. I read the obituaries too. I read them because I owed those people at least that much. I had made a decision and people had died because of it. Not immediately, not violently, but because I had cut a line that had been keeping them alive, and I had done it because I believed I was right, and I don't know anymore whether I was. Delia called me once, about 4 months after Hargrove. She didn't say much. She asked if I'd been following the news. I said yes. She asked if I could sleep. I said no. She said, me neither. And then there was a long silence, and then she said, I'd do it again. I need you to know that. I'd do it again because we didn't have the right not to. And she hung up. I went back to work. What else was there to do? The job was still the job. Pipes, corrosion, samples, reports. I drove the same back roads. I opened the same valve chambers. I wrote the same reports nobody read. But I checked the ground-penetrating radar more carefully now. I looked at every anomalous signal, every ghost line, every shadow on the screen that didn't match a blueprint. In February, I got assigned to a routine inspection in a town called Pelham, about 150 miles southeast of Hargrove. Small town, green country, nothing special. Standard water quality check on an aging distribution system. On the second day, I was running GPR along the main trunk line and I found it. A pipe, 24 inches, running parallel to the municipal main, 8 feet to the east, slightly deeper, no blueprint, no record, same diameter, same depth, same spacing. I climbed down into the trench I dug and put my hand on it. It was warm. The vibration ran through the metal and into my palm, slow, rhythmic, steady. And then just for a moment, it changed. The rhythm stuttered, quickened, then settled back to its original pace. As if something inside the pipe had noticed the contact, as if something vast and patient, threaded through miles of earth beneath my feet, recognized the pressure of a hand it had felt before. I stood in the trench for a long time, my palm flat against the warm metal, and I thought about Delia's voice on the phone, and about 17 obituaries, and about an organism older than the town above it. And I thought about the shaped charges in the back of my truck, and I didn't know what to do. I still don't. But the pipe is still pulsing under Pelham, and I can feel it in my sleep now. The rhythm of it, slow and patient, like something waiting. Last week, I pulled the health statistics for Pelham County. Average lifespan, 91 years. Cancer rate, nearly 0. Heart disease, a fraction of the state average. The numbers are the same as Hargrove. They're exactly the same. I have the charges, I have the detonators, I have the authority and the access and the knowledge of exactly where to cut. I could drive out there tomorrow morning and do it again. Sever the connections, clean the water, and sit back and count the funerals. Or I could close my report and walk away and let the pipe do whatever it's been doing for the last 100 years and hope that I'm wrong about what growing means. I put my hand on the pipe again. Yesterday I didn't mean to. I was running a standard wall thickness test, routine work, and I pressed my palm flat against the metal, the way you do when you're checking for vibration. The warmth came through my glove immediately, and this time I didn't pull away. The pulse matched my heartbeat, or my heartbeat matched the pulse. I couldn't tell which had adjusted to the other. I stood there for 5 minutes, hand against the metal, my heart and the pipe beating in sync, and for those 5 minutes I felt good. Better than good. I felt healthy and calm and certain in a way I haven't felt since October. I pulled my hand away and the feeling faded, and all that was left was the cold and the weight of what I know and the choice I don't know how to make. Dahlia says she'd do it again. I believe her. She's a better person than I am, or maybe just a more certain one. She sees a contaminant in a water supply, and she sees a threat. And she's right. She's absolutely right. But she didn't stand in that trench yesterday with her hand on the pipe and feel her heart synchronize with something enormous and ancient and warm. I don't know what's in the pipes. I don't know if it's feeding us or farming us or if the distinction even matters. I don't know if the people of Pelham would choose the water or the truth if someone gave them the option. I don't know if the people of Hargrove would have chosen differently if I'd asked before I cut the lines instead of deciding for them. What I know is this. There's a pipe under Pelham that isn't connected to anything. Both ends terminate in sealed caps in the middle of empty fields. No intake, no outlet, no pump, no reservoir. But something is flowing through it, warm and steady, and it's been flowing since before anyone alive can remember. And the pipe is growing slowly toward the water that 2,000 people drink every day. And tomorrow morning I have to decide.